Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
My name is Stefan Bressler, and I'm an LLM student from Germany at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. Today is Saturday, March 25th, and we have 10 minutes past 2 p.m. I'm going to interview Professor Honnold in his apartment in Crosslands in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. First, Professor Honnold, please let me tell you that it's a pleasure for me to be able to be with you here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I want to also thank you for being willing to take part in the Oral Legal History project of the University of Pennsylvania Law School. Now, I'm looking forward for the interview and the memories you're gonna tell us right now. Thank you very much.
No, I don't. I really. You're ready.
I'm ready. Can start. Okay?
Yep.
Professor Honnold, starting the interview chronologically, I would like to ask you a bit about your family background. Where were you born?
I was born in Illinois, in the east central part of it, on a farm.
Yeah.
And do you want to know anything more about that?
When were you born?
December 5, 1915.
And where were your parents born? Where did they come from?
Well, they grew up in this general area of the farming country of east central Illinois.
And what did they do?
Well, my father was a farmer, and my mother was a mother.
Did she also work on the field?
Only in desperate times. And she had a very limited education, but she was marvelous with poetry.
Ah, so when you say she had a limited education and you were going to college, to law school, what was their opinion about you studying and not going to be a farmer?
Well, they were very disappointed. And there's perhaps a story that's too long about this. They had a fine son who had great promise as a farmer, but he came back from high school with a pain, and it turned out that he had appendicitis, and they put him on the dining room table, and there was an operation, but already it was too late, and he died. And that left him with only a sister, and then they somehow arranged for my mother to have another baby.
So
and my father was delighted that it turned out to be a boy because he thought he had his farmer.
And so you have one sister, and is she still alive?
No.
No.
She was 14 years older than I have been, and so she died several years ago.
And what did she do?
She was a fine musician, and she married a musician, and they taught music and studied folklore in southern Illinois.
And did your parents teach you a special philosophy of life, or do you have a philosophy of life?
Well, I gradually have learned things that seem better than other things that are bad, but I don't think they thought of it as a philosophy. My father was to him it was very important to work very hard and very carefully, and so that I think was the main point.
So you acquired their working ethics?
Yes, I did, except that it rather drove me away, because my father was used to handling hired hands, and he'd say, do this and do it this way and do it that way, and I never had a chance to make my own mistakes.
You told me before that you are a Quaker and you're living here at a
Yes.
retirement place which is run by Quakers. What role did religion play in your life?
Not large. I am something of a skeptic, and I'm surprised that the Quakers tolerate me in that sense. But that is the way I am, and have been very much interested in science and the relationship between science and religion. But in that area, I'm something of a skeptic.
You're married, Professor Honnold?
Yes, I am.
With whom?
With a very charming lady of Swiss background. Her parents were Swiss. and Kunst she was, when I saw her first at the University of Illinois.
So she studied too?
Yes, she was a student there, living at home with her father, who was a very outstanding physicist who grew up in Switzerland.
Do you think that this had any impact on you, that you had a father-in-law that was a professor also to become a professor?
That's an interesting question. I don't think so. I loved him very much, but and he, even before we were engaged, he said I couldn't love a son more. So that held me to him, of course.
And maybe with this, with a wife and a family that has connections to Switzerland, to a foreign country, do you think that this also gave you some incentive to get some interest on international law?
No, I think I had it right from the beginning.
From the beginning. Do you also have children or grandchildren?
Yes, we have 3 children, and
I'm sorry, we're going to ask you to ask that again.
Okay.
We could hear the clock.
oh, I see.
Okay.
You do it really perfect. Do you have children or grandchildren?
Yes, we have children and then several grandchildren.
And what did your children do? Did they also become lawyers or physicists?
Well, let's see. Our son, the last child, decided to be a lawyer, and he was very successful in that, but he found that what lawyers had to do did not relate well enough to the human condition. So he studied at night while he practiced as a lawyer and became a psychotherapist. And that's what he's doing, and that's what he loves to do. And we have a daughter who is also a psychotherapist, but she is ailing now, and we're sorry about that. And we have another daughter who became quite ill when her baby was born, and she is not very well. So we have our sorrows and our glad things.
And your grandchildren? Do you meet them often?
Not so much. No, they're not near here, and so we don't see them so much. Oh, grandchildren. Well, I skipped a beat, yes. We have something that now is especially charming. Our son has a little boy who has just become 4 years old, and he's a pretty interesting fellow. And so we enjoy that, and we get to see him more than we see the other grandchildren.
Thank you. Now we're going on chronologically, and beginning with your schooling. Do you remember your early schooling?
Oh yes, oh yes. It was a one-room school. I walked down a gravel road for something almost a mile, and in this one-room school there were all 8 grades and only 1 teacher, and all facilities were outside, so it was a very ordinary country school. But I had a teacher that I liked very much when I was very small, and then later on it wasn't so good, but I was able to skip a grade, and since my birthday was in December, I got about 2 years ahead that way.
So you were much younger than your classmates?
Well, yes, I guess so.
And did you also have to teach, because I know that in such a small country school it's very often that the elder children have to teach the younger ones because the teacher cannot teach all children at one time. Did you also have to do?
Oh, I didn't see that.
You didn't see that?
The teacher had to work very fast. She told my mother that if my mother would have me on the porch for all summer and teach me what we call the 4 or 5 what do you call them? Stages of can we cut this?
Sure.
That's fine.
I'm playing on my being 85.
Nobody will ever see that.
Well, the teacher said that if my mother during the summer would teach me the 4 and the 5 multiplication tables, I could just go on ahead, and that's how it lightened the work of the teacher, and it got me just a little bit ahead in the schooling.
Okay. And how was high school then?
High school was very interesting. It was 14 miles away in the county seat. It was a very remarkable name of Paris, Illinois. Obviously the French had been coming down through the streams. And it was very interesting. I had a wonderful teacher who was teaching me how to handle poetry, and set up a separate class for a few of us who needed to or wanted to learn how to project poetry and other literature. I'm glad of that. And then on the other side, I enjoyed being on the debating team. And we've had competitions with the other schools round and about.
Okay. In those days when you were studying at high school and later on also in college and at law school, there was the time of the Big Depression. Did you have to work during your school days in order to finance it, or did you receive any scholarships?
Well, at the state university, the costs were very low, and so we didn't need to ask for help for that. So far as the University of Illinois went, that was not a trouble, and I lived in a little flat. Not anything fancy, but everything worked out well, and I enjoyed the work. But what happened during the time there, although I started to work in literature, the Depression came in, and I wanted to do something in political science that might be related to the Depression, and that's the way I wound out.
So. When you were in college, your major was originally political science, or you changed?
It was political science and philosophy.
Political science and philosophy. And from which college was it?
University of Illinois. It was about in the middle of the state, about 60 miles away from our farm.
So you chose it because of nearness to home?
I think that that seemed just about right to our parents.
When you just said before that you choose your major because of the Depression, because you wanted to change something.
Yeah.
Can you explain that a bit?
Well, I was just learning about some of the problems of the Depression, and at the high school stage, at my youth, I didn't have anything I could do, but I was trying to learn.
Were there any persons who you would consider to be very influential in your student days?
Well, there was a fine professor of political science, and he turned me away from other things to political science, and he had a very realistic view of political science, which I trusted and enjoyed very much. I finished in 3.5 years, and then I did graduate work for the last half year.
And what kind of activities were you involved during high school and college?
High school, debating team. College, debating team, with an exciting time when a fancy debating team from Oxford came. And in a big auditorium, I was one of those who tangled with them. And that was great fun. And then also there was the university chorus. I sang in the chorus, and there's where I met the lady who turned out to be my wife, Anne.
Was this involvement in the debating team and your major of political science then the reason to become a lawyer, or did you always want to become a lawyer? Did you consider other options?
Well, I think my idea about being a lawyer was growing during college when I got into work in political science, and so that rather settled it.
Were there any lawyers somewhere in your family or lawyers you knew, or you just were interested in that field?
No lawyers.
Okay.
And many farmers.
Then you went to law school.
Yes.
And do you remember the admissions process in Harvard Law School?
Well, it was there a bit of a problem because the Depression was on, but I had the good luck to find that there had been a man there who felt that Harvard Law School was too full of aristocrats. And so he made a lot of money, and he set up a special fellowship for what I call just a yokel, a country yokel. And so that was my route towards Harvard Law School.
And why did you choose Harvard Law School? Because it was so prestigious? Or?
Well, I had asked one of the faculty members in law at the University of Illinois, and they suggested Harvard. And I followed that rule, that suggestion. It was, of course, very exciting, very different from what I knew. But later on, I found that there were other superb law schools also.
Did you have to talk to the dean or other professors to get into the law school? Do you remember that?
No, they invited me just automatically.
Just because of your grades? Then?
Yes, I had a good record.
Excellent. Are there any particular things you remember from your first year in law school? It's supposed to be very hard.
Well, it was very nice, except for one professor who felt that it was his mission in life to terrorize the students. He felt that students who had gone to liberal arts schools had brains full of mush. And so frightening them, he thought, would straighten things out. And our nickname for him was the Bull. And in fact, he was so notorious that there was a special, well-known movie that featured him with another actor. It was called The Paper Chase.
I heard about that. What was the name of the professor?
Bull E.H. Warren. We had another Warren who was a gentleman, and we called him Gentleman Joe Warren.
Which courses or professors made a very specific impression on you? Which courses did you like? Which professors?
Well, something was beginning to grow in my mind, and there was one particularly important professor, Zachariah Chafee, C-H-A-F-E-E, Chafee. And he was strong on human rights, and so I enjoyed being with him. And then there was an interesting development, because while I was there, President Roosevelt appointed Felix Frankfurter, who had me in a very, very small group of students working on the law review. And that was fun to see him worry about whether or not he would be actually confirmed.
Did you also have Professor Frankfurter as a teacher? How was he as a teacher there?
He was spotty. When he was good, like the little girl, he was very, very good. But when he was bad, well, he hadn't prepared very well. He was doing a lot of other things. But he was a very interesting man, and of course he was interesting as one of the justices of the Supreme Court.
You said you were editor of the Law Review. What do you think? Did you learn a lot of things there? Do you think it had an impact on your professional career?
I think it had an enormous impact. I had not before had strict examination and editing of what I had written. It had always seemed to be perhaps all right, but when we had strict editors, I learned how to be very strict, and that I appreciate very much.
Did you also write articles in those?
Yes, I wrote, well, not full articles. The students didn't do that, but I wrote substantial articles. Well, one or two small ones and one substantial one.
And it was also on constitutional law in those days?
Well, I think it was.
And what did you do after graduation from Harvard?
I got married almost instantly, because I had Anne Kuntz, as she was then, had known each other for several years, and we knew that right after graduation we wanted to go to Europe and meet her Swiss relatives, and so we were married right in Harvard Chapel, and then in a few days we got on a boat and went to Europe.
So it was 1939. This wasn't that the outbreak of the Second World War?
Not yet, but it got us at the end of our summer. Of course, the war clouds were shaping up, but the problem struck at the end of our summer when we were down in Rome, and we saw that there was the pact between Germany and Stalin that had been made, and we knew that the war was going to start right away, and indeed it was beginning to start before we could leave. So we had an interesting trip getting home.
Were you in fear of submarine boats?
Well, not at the beginning, but we went through France. France, as probably the old folks remember, was immediately totally mobilized, and it was dark cities, dark in the coaches of the trains, and dark in the cities where we got off. But finally, we got up to a northern port of France, and we had the good luck to catch the boat that was coming from America, on which we had a ticket to go back to the United States on. So we got on that boat, and as we went through the isthmus, right between England and France, we heard Clement Attlee declare war on Germany, coming over the radio of the boat.
And so then you came back just in time.
Yeah, that's right.
And after your honeymoon and after graduation from Harvard, I guess you started working.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Well, the summer before my last year in school, there was a very fine law firm that asked me if I could just come and get acquainted, supposedly do work during the summer. And then at the end they said, well, we'd like for you to come after you graduate. And so after graduation, I had a job.
And where was that?
It was on Wall Street, and it was a middle-sized but very, very splendid firm. Wright, Gordon, Zachary, Parlin, and Cahill.
And how long did you stay there? Did you like that?
Well, I loved it for a while, but I had explained to them that I might leave after 2 years. And they said, no, you won't go away once you're here. But after a while, the big numbers of the kind of work you do between large corporations didn't seem so very interesting. And so I decided that and told them I would leave at the end of 2 years, and then I found a job in Washington.
Do you remember your salary in those days?
Oh, you mean at the law firm?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. This will shock many people, but the up and down Wall Street, they had created what they called a general's agreement, that for students just out of law school, no one would pay more than $2,000 a year. But everything was very cheap at that time, so we got along all right, and there was a nice raise at Christmas time. But nothing like what lawyers, even very young lawyers, get now.
What do you think about that development?
Well, I think that, you mean the big development of enormous payments? I think it's unfortunate. And there are other aspects of the big law firm that is discouraging, because the sizes are so great that people can't have real contact with other people that they need to talk with.
You told me then you went to Washington. What did you do in Washington?
Well, the first thing I did was to get a job with the Securities and Exchange Commission. It was one of the more interesting of the New Deal organizations. And so I started there, and I was enjoying that fine, but after several months, then Pearl Harbor came. And the United States was automatically at war. And they began to move all of the non-war agencies out. And actually, they were going to move the SEC to Philadelphia, which I thought would be a pain worse than death because of what I wanted to do. I felt differently about it later on. So I started work in one of the war agencies.
Can you tell me what you had to do for the Securities and Exchange Commission? Do you remember that?
Well, there was a little problem right at the beginning of the war. Congress was not dealing with the special problem that was happening, and that was the sudden inflation of prices for everyone at the beginning of the war. So there came to be a rather strange kind of law. We called it jawbone law, and some very interesting people, 2 or 3, were getting ready, established an office with some vague connection to the office of the president. And then when they saw that the kinds of machinery that were being made were being sold at an outrageous price, they would make a call. This is the office of the President of the United States. You are charging too much. We know that with the war effort, you will not want to exceed this certain price. And so that was the beginning. But shortly after that, Congress acted and established the Office of Price Administration, and that was where I was transferred to. Well, that was where I started, and that the arrangement to the office that was developed later on was just an outgrowth of the jawbone work, but done very, very legally.
And what did you have to do there?
My main job was to defend the Office of Price Administration in a special court that was created. It was a special court because it was selected by the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court from the very best of the highest secondary courts in the country. And people sometimes said that was the best court in the country because of this kind of selection. And my job was to appear before them, and if I thought that the countries, the businesses that were charging too much and were being cut back by OPA, was my job to appear before this court and defend that action. And if I didn't think that that was reasonable, it was my job to tell the price makers that they were going too far. They didn't always believe me, but usually they did.
And what was your feeling? You were just a very young graduate and just worked for 3 years, and you had to deal with justices of the highest rank, very experienced person. Do you remember the impression that made to you?
Well, in the wartime, almost anyone had to do almost anything. And and maybe after a little experience, they felt that I could be helpful on that.
Do you remember any big case you were involved in?
Oh, that will be hard. There was the fruit industry, the grape industry, there was the metal, iron industry, there was the dairy industry, and we had to face these different interests in mass because Kenneth Galbraith, a splendid economist, felt that you couldn't give a decision to just one part of the industry. They should get together and give you consolidated well, let's see, can we cut?
Sure.
Okay. It was important not to single out one industry, one part of the industry, but also to get consolidated consolidated, you're going to have to strike again, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Okay.
It was important to have a just and fair answer by having the industry make up consolidated price reports and earning reports for the whole industry as a whole, consolidated together. And that's a rather complex situation to deal in a big industry. But I think we did a fair job.
Are there any brand names or big entrepreneurs maybe you phoned with, like Henry Ford or whomever?
No, no. These people didn't appear. Oh, there was one head of the cotton industry in the South that I had to deal with personally. But that was all right.
Okay. So we shift gears now to your teaching career that started after the war. Can you tell us a bit how it came that you became a professor?
Well, University of Pennsylvania had lost several of its professors through death or age, or because of the flood of students, veterans that were coming back to all of the law schools. So they needed more help. One of the very prized and dearly loved by me professors, Paul Burton, was sent to Washington to find talent, and he came back with Lou Schwartz and one or two others, George Haskins and me, and so we were part of the what the old professors called the second team.
And your decision to become a professor, by what was it influenced? Was it more scholarship or was it more teaching that attracted you for doing that job?
Oh, that's hard to answer. I couldn't think of anything that would be more interesting, so that's what I decided to do.
Did you have before any experience in teaching, or you were just interested how it will work out?
Oh, well, I thought Penn was not treating me well when they said what course I should have. And I said, what? I assumed that after my work in Washington and that I would deal with problems like that. No, they said, we want you to teach a course called Sale of Goods. Well, I said, at Harvard, all of my colleagues said that was the most stupid and boring course they had, and they advised me not to take it. And so I said, I'd rather not do it. Well, they said, we're in a jam. We've had this course taught by a lawyer from downtown who made a specialty of it, but now he's developed a problem of alcoholism, and we need your help. So here I was, a young teacher, thrown into a class of 200 or so to teach tough veterans, many of them older than I, on a course that I had never taken. So I worked pretty hard at night trying to keep ahead of the class. But it seemed to be all right. There is one of my pupils who's here in Crosslands, and he didn't think it was as bad as I thought it was.
Can you describe a bit what were your impressions like? You first said you didn't like to go to Philadelphia with the Securities and Exchange Commission. What was your feeling when you arrived in Philadelphia? What did the law school look like?
It looked terrible. I had to drive through very, very poor areas of Philadelphia. It happened to be, Anne and I would remember, a dreary, rainy day, and we came to this old building that had not had money for painting the walls inside. For 4 or 5 years of the war, there had been scarcely any students there. So it looked dreary, but this was it. And so quickly it changed very, very radically as the masses of veterans swarmed in.
And you said now you taught sales. What other things had you teach first and later on at Penn?
Well, the thing that I began to enjoy also, after I learned that sales wasn't quite as awful as I had been told, was constitutional law. And again, I mentioned before Paul Burton, the one who was the careful finder in Washington. Well, he was teaching constitutional law, and his classes were too big, 200 or so, and so he said, "John, I'd like for you to teach 1/2 of the class," and he would teach the other half. And that I enjoyed very much, and I enjoyed working with him because we started making a book which went through 3 editions. There's sensitive problems in areas of constitutional law, and how should we shape them and what should we say? Well, we discussed and we never came to a serious disagreement, which I think you would seldom find. And so then this book went through 3 different editions, and then something else happened and I went in other ways.
Okay. When you look back at your years at Penn Law School, which things did you like especially about Penn Law School, and which things would you criticize?
Well, you know, I went there without any teaching experience. I had nothing to gauge it by, but it soon became a very happy place. Good collegial relationships. There was one elderly professor who was a little bit difficult, you know, sometimes.
You can mention names.
Well, it was a bachelor named Edwin Keedy, and but he was all right. Is there time for an anecdote?
You can.
Oh, surely.
Yeah.
Well, at one of the law school club dinners, Professor Keedy, was there and saw that one of the students was drinking too much, and actually he realized that he was going to pass out, so he disappeared Keedy disappeared for a little while, and the student had to be carried up to his office. To his room in the place where we were having our thing. And when he woke up, well, he was wakened by the phone in the morning. And the phone said, "Mr. Smith, this is Professor Keedy speaking. Do you know where you are?" "No." "Well, you're in room such and such, and are on the chair by your bed. There is a clean shirt and a razor. An hour from now, I want you in my class, clean and ready to talk." And so he did.
So professor brought him home, or?
I told him to get to class at the time when the class would start.
Okay. And you mentioned Mr. Burton. Which colleagues you had also a close relationship with?
Well, really, all of the rest of them, with one exception which I just won't mention.
That's fine. Are there not also some you were privately going out, or?
Oh yes, there was a lot of that in the early days.
Okay. The next thing I'd like to know is, did you also get offers from other law schools?
Well, actually, I did. There were two kinds. I received offers of chairs from Columbia University and from Yale and from Cornell. And from Cornell I got an invitation to be dean, and I went and talked with the president for a while, and I found that I didn't care for that president at all. And so I decided I had to decline. And shortly after that, something rather drastic appeared in one of the important magazines. It had a column of coincidences, and they had a column of the president's inaugural speech, and beside it a column of another speech that had been given earlier than he had. So I think I was glad not to have had to deal with him.
Because you think afterwards they would have said this guy was appointed by that president, or? Yes,
well, he also said he wanted to come to the faculty meetings of the law school. And that, I think, we thought would cripple our autonomy. So that was another reason I said no. And as to Yale and Columbia, our daughters were just in the swing of getting acquainted with their friends, and they thought it just wouldn't be fair to leave.
You said no for family reasons?
Yes,
basically?
for that, yes.
That's
indeed.
very nice for you. They will have liked that, I guess. So,
Stefan, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop for just a sec. Okay.
okay. I heard from the librarian for international law that you were very involved in the graduate program for foreign students, and that you always had close contact to foreign students. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Well, I'm glad she said that. I do enjoy the graduate students, and I even kept that up after I reached the age of retirement. So I stayed on just for that purpose, or for some specialized course that I wanted to teach. And we enjoyed having the graduate students from different countries come out to our home in a little town called Swarthmore, where there's a nice little college. And there were wonderful times there. I used to play the guitar a bit, and there was a man from Greece who had Greek folk songs, and just we had fun evenings together of all sorts.
And what course were you teaching then for the international students, or which was it?
I don't know. I think it was a general seminar that they could tell what they wanted to study, and then I would help them if I knew anything about what they wanted to study, I could help them then.
Did you have any time also to be elsewhere engaged outside the field of law? You mentioned music, for example.
Yes.
Being a professor, or did you do any sports during that time?
Oh, I'm not very good at sports. At that time, we did something that I'm glad to remember, although I haven't thought of it for decades and decades. The problem was with interaction between the white and black. And so one thing we had near the town of Swarthmore was a fellowship house, and they had a nice chorus. They didn't sing about problem songs, but we had a good time singing together. I think that we made some good progress in relationships that way.
It was a mixed chorus.
Mixed chorus. And then there was a fellowship farm one summer I went to where there was similar work. For their own misfortune, the very good conductor that they had couldn't do it anymore, and so I had to do some conducting for a year. I did my best. It wasn't very good, but it worked a bit. So that was one thing I did. And I suppose, well, then there were we had these children, you know, and I gave a lot of time to the children.
And just let me come back to that chorus. It was in those days where there was really segregation here. Were there people who did not like that you were engaged in such things? Maybe
I don't know whether they didn't like it or not. Oh yes, there was one thing. The town established a private swim club, and they invited everyone, invited us, except people who were Afro-Americans. And both Ann and I felt that wasn't right. And when we came to the next annual meeting, I made a speech saying that we should accept everyone. What was frightening for the people who were bigots was that they almost won. So that developed a different pattern in the next year or so. In the meantime, we had resigned from the club because we felt we didn't want to be with people who felt that way. And then after they permitted Afro-Americans to come to their private club, we asked to join. They said, no, you have been too difficult. And then the committees gathered, and then they let us come in after a while. So that's a little bit of a local activity.
Thank you very much. We're taking a break right
Okay.
now. But first, turn to constitutional law.
Stefan, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Start again, please.
Again?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. It's really... Professor Honnold, after the break, I would like to resume the interview and concentrate on questions on your scholarly work, especially on the unification of private law. I had the impression that you started your scholarship on constitutional law and not on private law. Constitutional law is a highly political subject, I think. How would you describe your political beliefs?
Oh, my word. Well, I think my central idea is a fair deal for the underdog, for people who have had trouble, and most especially, well, immigrants and people who have come to this country in slavery and kept there, as sometimes occurs in certain parts of this country. Maybe we'll have to talk about that later.
So, your political beliefs didn't change over the years, or?
Well, I don't know that it was so complex. It was just a matter of sympathy for people who need help, if they deserve it, or can be helped so that they can deserve it.
And it sounds to me that this interest politically is going on the one hand, historically, it sounds a bit like the New Deal of Roosevelt.
Yes,
is that right?
yes, that's right. It actually, was the New Deal that brought me into this whole area, and so I think you hit it right on the nose.
And the second thing, it sounds to me like human rights. Were you also practically involved into the human rights issue?
Well, I mentioned earlier that about the fellowship chorus, and then there were other things that seemed important. At the edge of our town, sometimes there was a house that was sold, but was subject to perhaps to being burned down, and some of us would stay there overnight until the problem passed. I don't know what. Perhaps we can see. We can later on find other situations where there was something interesting.
You told me once that you were involved into a thing in Jackson, Mississippi. Can you talk about that?
Well, yes, that was a very interesting time. What we had in Mississippi was something of the aftermath of slavery times, because although slavery was supposedly abolished at the end of the Civil War, the people in the South found ways to hold them into a degree of servitude, at least in danger from being fired, or sometimes hung at a post. So that was enough to discourage people from seeking to get their rights in an area that was so dangerous for them. And so there was a situation in which I found that I could go down to Mississippi and help. It was done in this case through a phase of the American Bar Association's liberality. The leaders of the American Bar Association were sympathetic to this kind of work, and they provided the resources for getting a fine, safe house, or well, house is not right, an office in the Farish Street, which is in the black area of Jackson, Mississippi. And that's where the only place you're really safe, actually. So here we were. There was a group of younger people from various parts of the country, California and so forth, who also felt the urge to be helpful in this way. So as a chief, I had a very interesting group to take care of. And then a great episode developed. I don't know, should I tell you about something that happened? Well, Jackson, Mississippi had its courthouse of the state. And that courthouse of the state had been called to an emergency session. The reason for which, quite obviously, was to find ways to keep black Africans from voting. Now, our friends who were being citizens, but being abused in this way, had not dared even to make complaint. But at this point, at the Morning Star Baptist Church, they gathered together and felt that there was now something that they could do, and what they decided they should do was to make a petition which they would walk on the sidewalks peacefully down to the state capitol, the capital of all of Mississippi, and submit their petition on their rights to vote. And so they did. They were walking down the street, quite a substantial line, because once some started and felt that they were daring enough to raise their voices, the others trailed behind them. So it was a long string of people walking on the sidewalk. They had gotten about 3/4 of the way to the state capitol when there was a line drawn across, and a great big line of police, state and local police. And they said, "You cannot go beyond that line." And so the people who were walking there with their protest stopped, and they consulted with each other, and they finally decided that they were not going to be disturbed. And so they took a step or two across the line. Immediately they were thrown into cattle wagons and taken to jail, and then the people kept coming. Their friends had suffered this way. Well, they wanted to suffer, and the word got around through the local press that this was going on, and more people came pouring in, and pretty soon the jails were full, and so the others who stepped across the line they were taken down to the large, airy, empty rooms of the state fairground. They were kind enough to bring in some mattresses for night. And now I remember something that was poignant. The little children came along too, and the little boy came to me and he said, they took my freedom button away. Do they have a right to take away my freedom button? Well, at any rate, we did our best. And then, in the next days, the news had spread through the Times and the national papers, and then the buses came flooding in. And the same ritual was continued. They were carried out to the state fairgrounds and put in that jail. And in the meantime, it was my job to try to see if I could stop this. There were something I haven't thought about for quite a while. One of our group had been a specialist in children, and he thought that for a child to go to jail was about the worst thing that could happen. Well, it turned out that in this setting, the young people felt that they wanted to be a part of this. And if they were taken away from the jail, they would get at the tail of the end. And I think that was the right thing to do, like the little boy who had his freedom button. In the meantime, I was working day and night, working up an injunction to stop this sort of thing, which is obviously violating of the law. They had their right to go. And something that I seldom mention, but I took this to first to the local federal court, a man named Cox. And he turned out, he's appointed by John Kennedy of all things, but he turned out to be a bigot. And he would give no help at all. He wouldn't even deny our request for an injunction. If he would take any action, he thought that we might be defeated in some way. So the only thing to do was to fly to New Orleans, where the higher federal court was. And I felt I should do that, and submitted our injunction. And the federal court in New Orleans, a higher court, a federal court, knew exactly what kind of a situation we had, and they issued an injunction. And then the whole thing was dissolved. And the people felt that they had a right to this sort of thing, to raise their voices and not follow the guidances of their bosses, which was a very reckless thing because many of these people were hired out. But they took that risk. And that was one step that was possible. There were other things that went on, but this was perhaps the most interesting.
How did what kind of feedback did you get from your students when you came back to Penn? Your professors and your colleagues when you told them about that?
Oh, they were very interested. and sympathetic. I don't know that we had anybody who indicated that they wouldn't help if they could. So that was encouraging too. Now there could have been someone who had been badly taught. You have to be carefully taught, as one line says, but I didn't see any of that.
And so the civil rights movement went on, and
things like this were happening all over the South. This was just one example.
And also others professors from Penn, did they do similar work, or were you the only one who did such a thing?
Oh, so far as I know, they hadn't done exactly this, but I was so busy I don't know what they may have done. Perhaps they helped.
Okay.
A very interesting person that some people would like to know about. In Mississippi, one of the first persons I met was Marion Wright, a very small, slender, black woman who was a fine lawyer, and now she's famous as Marion Wright Edelman. She married one of John Kennedy's super guys, and now she is the leader of the rights of children in all sorts of ways.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we go on, and I had the impression that your major interest in your professional life changed a bit from constitutional law and human rights issues more to the unification of private law. Can you describe how your interest for that new subject did arise?
Yes. I think it started with a very remarkable man named Carl Llewellyn, who at Columbia before the war had started to develop uniform law that could be followed, not necessarily, but could be followed by the different states. Then the war came along, and after the war, Carl picked up that work again. And I took an interest in that because it seemed like a sensible thing to do in a place of 48 and then later 50 states. It was awkward for these so many states to have different laws, and so this would ease the rules and the accomplishment and the comfort of transactions in interstate goods. So I worked on that and helped a little bit at the tail end. At the end there were some problems in New York, and so I worked with the New York Law Revision Commission to get a compromise between what Carl and his sidekick Soya Menchikov would suggest. And so it was possible. There was a uniform law for international sales that for the 48, 49, 50 American states. And that seemed sort of good. And then I began to get another idea. I began to hear echoes from Europe, and most especially from an organization at Rome called Uni Droit, One Law, which was the center for developing uniform law for the countries of Europe. As we shall see later, it was unfortunate that Uni Droit didn't reach much farther beyond Europe, but that's something to be considered later on. So I began to take an interest in that, and immediately after the war, interesting things were in the air. The Ford Foundation, for instance, felt that it would be a good thing after the lawyers here had developed the same law for our 50 states. They thought it would be a good thing to have that for the various countries. And that's one thing that we'd been thinking about. And so they helped with trips to Rome, to Uni Droit, and early on, I was one of the first persons to, well, in the records, to talk about the importance of developing such a kind of law. Then, in addition to the help from the Ford Foundation, there was help by Fulbright and Guggenheim grants, and with the Keedys, 3 children, we went to Europe and worked on that with the children there, learning a lot at the same time. And I, at the University of Paris, working there, and then more especially at the International Chamber of Commerce, where they asked me to make out a schedule of what was going on. And that was interesting too. So that was the beginning of some interesting work. And before long, it turned out that that there was finally a decision that they were ready to develop a law that could be translated into other languages and would apply generally. If the United States could have uniform law for 50 states, Europe and perhaps some other related states could have uniform law for their areas. So that was intriguing, and pretty soon I found that a convention had been called to meet at The Hague, in which interested people could go and see if they could agree on that sort of an idea. And indeed they did. And again, I mentioned Soya Menchikov. The 2 American people were Soya Menchikov, a very strong woman, and myself. We divided up the work. And then, after finally, there came to be a vote. And in 1964, there was established an international convention for uniform law for any state that could be found to adopt it.
What did you think about the Hague Convention? I read about the Hague Convention, and the literature very often is very skeptic about it and said that it was not very useful and it was not very accepted. What do you think about the Hague Convention?
Well, I would have been willing to ask the United States to take this step, just to help that step to get going. But I didn't get any support for this job in the United States, and to the misfortune of the people who were working on this job, only 9 states adopted this convention, and then the growth stopped. And so it seemed clear that the UNIDROIT, with its emphasis on Europe, was not good enough for worldwide use. And by this time, the new countries of the world had been formed at the end of the war, and it was time for a wider look. And here was the UN that was ready, perhaps, to help with this.
And you mentioned that the US, when asked to adopt the Hague Convention, refused to do that.
They were not interested, yes.
Can you tell me what the reasons were for this?
It's hard to know why one says no, but it probably was that the countries that had adopted it were not kindred countries. They would not meet the wider needs, and at any rate they felt that there hadn't been sufficient attention given to the ideas of the New World. And for reasons like that one couldn't be sure about. It seemed that that was the reason.
But it was not a reason between the difference in common law and civil law that the U.S. refused to join the convention?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I could be, but I'm not. I doubt that, because Britain was one of the very few representatives at The Hague, and they surely guarded that kind of law.
And you said you were there at the convention with Meshnikov. What exactly was your role at the Hague Convention?
Well, I wrote an article after the Hague Convention and described it, and said that it was could be useful, but what was needed was a wider constituency.
So it was the...
I'm sorry, let me just interrupt you for 1
Yep.
second. Let me shut that window, actually.
That the two of us had been at The Hague, Soyemenchikov and myself, plus various other people who from the United States who didn't have quite the same interest that we did. And I think that both of us felt that there were problems that hadn't been solved in a way that we could understand. And so it was, I think, that partly that stopped it in the United States. But at any rate, it was reasonable to say, after just a few of the European countries, plus Israel, had joined, that we could take part.
Is it right that you were the first person who proposed the establishment of an UN agency for the unification of international trade law?
Well, there is something in the records of the UNIDROIT where I impolitely said that I thought that it would be more useful if it could work on a more worldwide basis rather than a more local basis. And that is still in the records, I guess.
And later on you became chief of UNCITRAL.
Yes.
Exactly that agency you proposed to establish.
Yes.
What was your main goal for that position?
Well, let me say first that as chief of the section, I had 3 or 4 jobs. One, my main job, was the sales convention. But then also there were other working groups that could, at the same time, were working on various other topics. Arbitration, I was working on arbitration too with them in the supervisory way. And carriage of goods by sea, and 1 or 2 other things of less importance. So these various things were going on at the same time, but my heart was mainly, and I gave most of my energy to having a convention that would be acceptable worldwide.
And from whom came the incentive to establish UNCITRAL and put you in the boat as chief?
I don't know. I spoke to the UN people and I said that I thought something ought to be done. I didn't ask to do it myself. But a few months later, they asked me if I would come. And then that was a problem for my wife, Anne, and me to pull up stakes and leave Pennsylvania and go up to New York. The problem, would be an important change, because at the University of Pennsylvania, as in most cases, you can only have a leave of absence for 1 year, and after that, they're through. So we took the risk, and soon there was a little delay. I haven't thought about this for a long time. After they had said, the job is yours, we want you to come, But there's a problem that was developed during the age of McCarthy, the man who thought there was a someone under every tree and every bush. At that time, President Truman and one of the heads of the UN, to quiet things down, had said that they would not accept any person from the United States as a member of the UN without getting a clearance from the from the United States. So I was working while that clearance was being observed. I wasn't fully on the job. Well, I was fully on the job, but I had no rights to the job at that time. And finally, with a long face, they said, "Well, I'm sorry, there's a problem. They say that we need a full surface, full FBI search of your background." And that was disturbing. I thought I knew what the problem was, because there was Mississippi and so-called radical thing there. There were communists hanging around the edge of something like this. I certainly never had that, but they had to have the kind of a search that would call on all the neighbors to see what I was like and whether I had any bad habits whatsoever. And then after some weeks they said, "Oh, good, it's come through." And I said, "Well, what was on that?" It merely said that there is no problem of Honnold being untrue to the United States of America. So they said, "All right, you can go up to the top level and take your oath." And there I took my oath, and the irony was that the oath was that I would not follow any instructions from any country, including my own. And I was very glad for that.
When you started work, you were pretty successful because you delivered the draft, and later on the convention in Vienna, many countries joined. When you compare the Hague Conference and the Vienna Conventions, on the Vienna Convention, what would you think, or what lesson did you apply from the Hague to the CISG?
Well, it needed a wider constituency in the making of the law. The Hague Conference at '64 had one of the most lovely people, André Tunk of France, was the star, la vedette of the whole proceeding, and he carried the thing together very well. But he was so good that things that could have been done better were accepted, I thought. And it's hard to get into the details of a complex convention of 30 pages, but what was interesting was that perhaps I should have mentioned that for the first step in the work, we decided that we could not have a large group of all of the countries of the world here in dealing with a delicate problem. So we developed a rather interesting idea, and that was that there would be delegates from each region of the world, which the 6 regions would select, but with the limited numbers. And so we had the cream of a large number of countries. All of the countries contributed their best people. And so we had a starting group of 36 people, plus an international organization or two, like the International ICC. And that made it workable.
other persons you would like to mention whom you consider to have been exceptionally influential on the draft?
Well, certainly one of the very most helpful men was a man from Mexico, Jorge Barrera Graf. He was chairman through all of the proceedings. I sat at his right elbow, and we worked together as the Secretariat would, but he was so very kind and thoughtful that he took care of some disappointments that people may have had. What was interesting was that in the very first days and weeks and months, these people from all over the world thought that the uniform law should have the rules and ideas that they were used to. And so that became very interesting in developing the need for a set of rules that would be understood and would be reasonable for all of these people. And what developed in the first days, where they said, "Oh, it's not right," came to be something different. They said, "Well, if we all agree that this will work, that's all right with us." And what I think it would be difficult to believe was this group of the Commission finished its work unanimously, with never having taken a formal vote. And so then, you know what the next steps would have to be. The next step had to be taking it to a diplomatic conference of all the countries of the world. And that was Vienna. And 62 countries, I think, were represented in various organizations. At the end of that work, with relatively few changes in the UNCITRAL draft, there was unanimous adoption by the conference of the Vienna Convention, in a convention that would be ready for the world to adopt. Now, I have to say it that way because if you make a convention and you don't get the countries to put it on your books, you don't have a thing. So there would be no real live convention until at least 10 countries had put it on their books as their law.
So I would like to come back to Barrera Graf. The way you describe Barrera Graf for the working out of the draft, and on the other hand, Entretanque before in The Hague, it seems to me that Entretanque, as an exceptional person, had everything in his hands and was not maybe such a good listener as Barrera Graf. Is this impression right that I get?
I feel it hard to say anything against Entretanque. We're great friends, and he and Suzanne, he's still living, fortunately. I think it was that he was held in leash by the committee of which he was a member, and he, with his brilliant and beautiful French, described what the committee had agreed on, and they hadn't perhaps worked quite hard enough or long enough.
You worked 10 years to prepare the draft. 1978, the draft was completed. So when you compare that again to The Hague, how long was the preparation in The Hague? You mean in The Hague the preparation was not that long and not that well?
Well, one would have to say two things. I think the preparation was not that long. And second, it didn't draw on enough different points of view to make it acceptable on a wide scale. I may be wrong about that, but that was the impression I got.
How did you feel in 1978 when the draft was completed?
I felt wonderful. I felt wonderful. And then in 1980, at the end of the conference, I felt even better. And I was astonished and really put back when at the end, and the final vote came through, they asked me to make a little speech.
I come to that. But you were not all the time chief of UNCITRAL.
No.
What did you do in between?
Well, then they accepted me back at Penn, but I worked then as representative of the United States in UNCITRAL, and I think people to some extent appreciated the experience I had had before I had to leave. At any rate, I worked very hard, and it worked very well.
So you were professor and delegate for the United States at the same time.
Yeah.
Now coming back to the Vienna conference, if we could turn back time, I just saw that if we would turn back time exactly 20 years from today, from 10th of March to 11th of April, now we got the 25th of March, the Vienna Convention was going on. Just right now, 20 years ago exactly. Are there any specific things that you remember that cannot be found in any records?
That can't be found in the records. Well, the records were very complete, I think, except sometimes. Sometimes when there was a very close division, then there would be a few people drafted from each side, and they would go out and work themselves to come to a compromise. And that was one way. I don't... and you wonder whether or not there was any improvement that could be made. Is that?
I was just alluding to a thing. In Vienna was also the famous Vienna Congress, and there's this famous saying in German, der Kongress tanzt, which means the Congress is dancing, because Vienna offers a lot of distractions, and you were there for 5 weeks. Did you work that hard all the time?
I worked pretty hard.
You worked pretty hard. So this congress
Anne was there.
dancing.
Well, there's a wonderful rose garden outside of the Hochburg. Where we met in the La Grande Salle, where the great room that put Europe together after the Napoleonic Wars, and that was an inspiration. And so, well, that helped the atmosphere. And then as to pleasures, I started to say that there's a beautiful rose garden, and at the end of a hard day I'd go out and Anne would be waiting for me there. She was there. So that helped. And then there were some nice dinners.
Do you remember some differences in the legal system that were subject to hard debates? You said it worked out very smoothly. I really cannot believe that.
No, there were differences that developed. And then groups were asked on both sides to study it and see if they can bring in a satisfactory answer.
When you try to remember, can you tell me some points that were maybe a kind of deal breaker?
What would be what?
Kind of deal breaker, which had the whole convention maybe broken off so that it wouldn't be adopted, or that really problematic?
No, I never saw a situation which threatened the life of the convention. I think everyone, or nearly everyone there, except one drunk from Ireland, were quite interested in what had happened. There's one little part of the convention. Can you cut?
Okay.
I think that the Vienna Conference ended in great good humor and satisfaction. Now, the one thing that was surprising was that the great enthusiasm of 2 or 3 countries that would surprise you: the Soviet Union and China. China had just come to the UN, and that's another story, I guess. Maybe I should tell you about that.
You can. Sure.
All right. Just before the diplomatic conference, there was a group at Columbia had organized ways to have contact with China, and as their first representative, they asked me to go to China and teach in Beijing University, or Beida, as they call it. So I did, and Anne was there, and she had a good time helping with the women who wanted to improve their English. But I enjoyed very much the time in the work in China, talking with the people, the professors who had their faces pushed in the mud in the Cultural Revolution, and they became frank enough to talk with me about that. And then, all right, and then the Ministry of Education gave us a marvelous trip by air, and being met not by guides but by members of the Department of Education. So China was very keen for it, and when we reached the point close to adoption of a group of states, the first group of states, China said, "We want to be among the first 10." And they did. They insisted on, well, we made it possible. And with the contacts I had made while I was teaching in China, in just a few days their credentials came through, and there was a happy day when the group of us, for various states, together with China, went to the UN and deposited our credentials. But the Chinese especially were interested.
So you did a kind of promotion tour through China in order to promote the ratification.
Oh, I had to do that within the range of my teaching. On the trip, I could only speak very quietly to the people who were there.
Okay. Did you do a similar thing also in the United States? I came to know that China and the United States were at the same time adopting.
That's right.
The convention, and then the fulfillment of this 10 countries ratification requirements happened so that it could come into force. Were there also some problems in the US? Were there some people who were against this convention?
Well, there were meetings of the bar associations, and people who were interested went to speak at the bar associations. I did some of that. But there was a wonderful lawyer whose name I can't remember, who organized the top lawyers of the country to agree on a long list of people who signed a statement saying that we must ratify the Sales Convention. That was lawyers at their best, I think. Then maybe that I helped in another very happy and interesting way. The representative from Australia, who was secretary, well, I'll think of his name in a minute. He was, he was like an associate general, strike. Take it out. I can't do that. On?
Yeah, yes.
The representative of Australia said they had a problem down in Australia because their states were scattered so widely around this great area that the states were concerned about what might be going at the capital in Canberra. Would I come and talk to all those various states, which was a hard job. It meant from Brisbane all the way around to Perth, but they made it very easy with planes and helpers and that sort of thing. That seemed to help because Australia was one of the, not the first, but one of the earliest members. And that also gave me a chance to go back to Australia for some of the meetings that were interesting, and then in New Zealand, where I had a lazy job of being a scholar in residence.
I heard that in many countries, especially in the US, the CISG is quite often in practice ignored. What went wrong? What do you think?
I don't know. I don't know. I think it may be exaggerated because in our country arbitration is very important. The Arbitration Center, the American Arbitration Association, takes arbitration and does it, but then destroys all of the material. You cannot know when there was an arbitration that is performed in the United States. So I would suggest that there is an unknown number of arbitrations done on the CISG rules. As to the rest, there are actions, but then there is another point that whether it is the arbitration center or just the main fact that American lawyers are fond of arbitrations. And with arbitrations, they can finish a job, and that is not given attention usually. But other than that, there may be things that I don't understand.
As you don't understand this, and let's say I'm such a skeptic person.
Yes.
What would you say to me? What are the advantages of the CISC? How would you convince me?
The same things. What are the advantages of uniform law for international sales?
How would you convince me?
Well, I would talk about how it would remove or reduce misunderstandings when you have people in different countries doing business. If they have a way to go that each gets the same rules, I should think that it would be helpful. I couldn't say much more than that because that is just the sort of thing that one would expect to operate. And instead of even arbitrations, when they have the same rules, I should think that would encourage their agreement so that they would not have to go to court. But I don't know what all is going on out there.
Okay. You wrote a commentary on the CISG, and you also published materials on the CISG. What else do you think has to be done, and what else did you do to promote the CISG?
Well, I think that's about the end of the line. Speaking and talking and that sort of thing. That's the most that I would know to say now. But there is a parallel program of the UN and UNCITRAL that I feel very strongly about. It's the development of better rules for the custody of goods sent by sea. And that work was going on while we were doing the UNCITRAL sales work. And here we had marvelous people helping, a marvelous scholar from the Netherlands, from Scandinavia, and so we had a great expert with us and various other good experts, and I think we developed a very reasonable and fine draft convention for modern lines. The The problem was that the great mercantile stations wanted to preserve the ancient rules that they had, which protected them from loss. It was from what I call the days of the wooden ships and iron men, before it was possible to have the marvelous help in charts and in overhead guidance that we have now. But the Hague rules have gone into force among about 30 countries, but they're all little countries. And the big countries with big mercantile businesses have avoided it, and that I feel very sorry about.
So the Hamburg rules were not such a success like
Not,
the Vienna
not as much as no, nothing like the Vienna Convention. Someday, maybe, who knows.
And you also were involved, you mentioned that earlier, in the UNCITRAL model rules for international arbitration.
Yes.
They were a success?
Yes, they're more flexible. You can arbitrate the way you want to be. That these are model rules. And but there are 30 countries that have based their arbitration law on the model arbitration laws. And the great person in that area was a man in the Netherlands, who was one of the great arbitrators. And he led quite a bit of the work. I can't think of his name now, but he was a good friend, and he's still living. What? Sanders. Peter Sanders. Yeah. P-I-E-T-E-R, Sanders. We worked together, and then we went to Delhi together to try out what we had developed before a worldwide conference on arbitration. And after that, we completed that part of the job.
So, looking into the future, what do you think will be the future of the Vienna Convention, and which ways would you suggest will the unification of private law go?
Oh, that's a hard one. I think that the convention, now in force, in perhaps Michael Wills estimates 3/4 of the population of the world, is off to such a good start that I can't imagine much change. And if someone wants to revise it, they'd better be careful, because they could create a lot of chaos. In general, it's working very well.
And according to the unification of private law, do you think there will be some more steps also in other fields?
In other fields? I'd have to think about that some more. I've been away from it for several years, and let me have a chance someday to think a little further about that.
Okay. Would you predict maybe one day a world civil code?
One day what?
A world civil code?
World civil code for everything.
Yeah, for everybody, everywhere.
That is an exciting idea. It have never occurred to me. So perhaps it'll be for you to start that work, if you feel that's a good idea.
I thought about with the internet, everything coming much closer together. Yes. With globalization. Maybe it could come. What do you think?
Well, in what way does the internet help?
Because people from everywhere can make deals together.
You're right. Okay. Well, maybe that will be a great help.
Now, the last questions. After your retirement, what did you do?
After my retirement, well, we came to this beautiful place, Crosslands, and we enjoy the people here, and we enjoy what we can do, and we're very happy here.
Are there some prizes or honors you receive that you're very proud of, which you would like to mention?
Oh, let's leave that alone.
Very modest.
Oh, well, yeah, we'll have to leave it alone for now.
Okay. And a similar question, looking back, what do you think are your biggest accomplishments in life?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I'm just happy with everything that developed. Well, I suppose the Vienna Convention was most significant.
Was also my impression. And finally, let me ask you, what are your wishes for the future?
Good health.
I wish you that too.
Thank you.
Professor Honnold.
Okay.